Morning of January 15, 2008, Los Angeles City. A 911 call was connected from a quiet apartment. A few hours later, a forensic worker zipped up a black plastic body bag. Inside was a 25-year-old young man. Pulse was 0. Pupils were dilated. The subsequent autopsy returned a dry result on medical papers: death by acute mixed heroin and morphine intoxication. Biologically speaking, a massive dose of central nervous system depressants had collapsed the respiratory system, causing the brain to completely stop receiving oxygen and the heart to permanently cease contracting. Tabloid newspapers immediately grabbed the headlines. They used familiar monikers to frame this death: addict, fallen star, Hollywood's spoiled child. But they deliberately forgot a core truth. The heart that just stopped beating in that apartment was not born to be filled with heroin. 14 years ago, it was a massive, profitable asset for one of the most powerful entertainment conglomerates on the planet. His name was Brad Renfro. Let's go back to the summer of 1994. Look at the giant posters hanging along Hollywood Boulevard. Audiences saw a 10-year-old boy with bright eyes and a resilient expression, standing on par with two cinematic icons, Susan Sarandon and Tommy Lee Jones, in the blockbuster The Client. That boy was the soul of the film. He was a magnet for the audience. He was the embodiment of innate talent. The world looked at those frames and applauded, but from the perspective of labor law, that was no artistic miracle. It was the beginning of a systematic record of abuse. Unlike adult actors with full legal awareness and psychological resilience, a 10-year-old child does not have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. This is the brain region responsible for risk assessment and impulse control. When the industrial machine hoists up such an incomplete biological individual, throwing them straight into the center of a film set worth tens of millions of dollars, they do not care about the neural ruptures. They only care about the revenue charts. The power system of the entertainment industry operates exactly like a mining machine. When they discover a rare metal ore, they will excavate, exhaust, and refine every ounce of commercial value until the mine runs dry. When Brad Renfro stepped onto the dazzling red carpet in 1994, he had no idea he had been stripped of the most fundamental right of a human being, the right to grow up normally. He officially became a money-printing tool, and when that machine eroded his nervous system with pressure, with a toxic environment, with enabling behavior, they immediately washed their hands of him. The 25-year-old corpse lying in the body bag in 2008 was not the result of a natural downfall. It was a physiological byproduct spat out by the capitalist wheel itself, after it had sucked dry every last drop of commercial value. To cover up a process of exploitation, nothing is as effective as weaving a fairy tale. The Hollywood elite are extremely adept at this trick. In 1993, director Joel Schumacher prepared to adapt John Grisham's best-selling legal novel, The Client. He needed a child male lead, but Schumacher did not want children from the polished acting schools in Los Angeles. He needed something called authenticity, a genuine wildness. That was when casting director Molly Finn was sent to scour across America. The search net was aimed squarely at poor residential areas, and they found Brad Renfro. The setting at the time was a dilapidated trailer park in Knoxville, Tennessee, a broken family, addicted parents. The 10-year-old boy was raised by a poverty-stricken grandmother. Renfro had absolutely no acting skills, no independent legal representation, and even less of a safety net to protect him. Through the lens of the hunters, this boy was not just a cinematic discovery. He was the most perfect, raw material, a target completely incapable of resisting. When the project started filming, the public relations campaign was instantly activated. Warner Brothers applied the PR spin tactic. Bluntly put, they took the boy's poverty and family tragedy, molded it into a rags-to-riches script, and threw it out as media bait. Articles praised Hollywood as a savior. They painted a picture where the cinematic machine reached out to save a child from the quagmire of a Tennessee slum, granting him fame and fortune. The public obediently fell into that emotional trap. Audiences swarmed to the theaters. The Client premiered and created a financial explosion. The film grossed over $115 million worldwide, a massive return on investment. Brad Renfro instantly became a phenomenon. Awards were handed out. New contracts were continuously thrown onto the table. From a child playing in an empty dirt lot, the entertainment ecosystem forced him into expensive suits, standing and smiling before a forest of blinding camera flashes. But behind that fake aura, Reality was a cold exploitation site. When a 10-year-old child is thrust into an adult working environment, with filming schedules lasting 10 to 12 hours a day, their biological system is severely overloaded. There was no psychological consultant on set. No one explained to the boy how to cope with the immense pressure of carrying a million-dollar project. His sole guardian was an elderly grandmother, completely overwhelmed and powerless against the cunning of corporate lawyers. The only protection existing on paper was California's Coogan Act, which required setting aside a small portion of earnings into a trust fund. But money in a bank account has no function in protecting neurons. The illusion of a paradise of fame completely obscured the stench of toxicity. They did not save Brad Renfro from the high-risk environment in Tennessee at all. The Studio Alliance merely uprooted the boy, placing him into a nuclear reactor of temptation, pressure, and chemicals in the heart of Los Angeles, where, once the studio doors closed, the destruction of his nerve cells truly began. After the box office explosion of The Client. 1994, Brad Renfro was not returned to his childhood. He was officially bound to a high-speed industrial production line. In just the next 3 years, from the ages of 11 to 14, he was continuously drained through major projects. The Cure. 1995. Tom and Huck. 1995. Sleepers. 1996. For an adult actor, shouldering this workload is already a colossal pressure. For a child, it is a death sentence for the nervous system. Look at the structure of a workday on set. 10 to 12 continuous hours under high-pressure lights. Renfro had to memorize dozens of pages of dialogue, had to manipulate his emotions to cry, laugh, and rage on the director's command. When the filming schedule ended, he was thrust back into elite parties, promotional campaigns, and endless interviews. There were no breaks to regenerate biological energy, no normal schooling, no peers. And within that very suffocating ecosystem, drugs appeared. It didn't come from shady smugglers in dark alleys. It was present right in the lavish Hollywood parties, consumed openly by the adults surrounding him, from actors and directors to producers. For a child already carrying psychological trauma from a broken family, chemicals became the only escape to numb the extreme neural tensions. The entertainment elite knew this very well. They applied a cruel risk management strategy called willful blindness, roughly understood as intentional blindness. Studio executives, talent managers, and public relations teams deliberately turned a blind eye to Renfro's first signs of collapse. They didn't put him in rehab centers because that would disrupt filming schedules and cost millions of dollars in compensation fees. Instead of protecting the child, the industrial machine chose to enable him. They became enablers, the perfect accomplices. As long as Brad Renfro could still drag himself to the set, hit his mark in front of the camera, and squeeze out revenue-generating tears, they absolutely didn't care what chemicals filled his veins. The only safety net he had was cold legal contracts, designed to protect corporate profits, not to protect a human life. The collapse of a biological body never happens in silence. It always leaves behind glaring legal records. In 1998, at the age of 15, Brad Renfro was arrested by the police for the first time for possession of cocaine and marijuana. In 2000, he was involved in the theft of a yacht in Florida. The incidents kept repeating with charges of driving under the influence, probation violations, and possession of illegal substances. At this point, in the eyes of the entertainment conglomerates, Brad Renfro had changed formats. He was no longer a profitable asset. He had officially become a legal liability. In the film industry, there is a deathly barrier called uninsurable, unable to be insured. Any actor wanting to join a film project must have an independent insurance company underwrite their risk. As Renfro's police record grew thicker, insurance companies immediately refused to sign the papers. Without insurance, no studio dared to hire him. At that exact moment, the Hollywood machine instantly initiated the severing process. The managers who once chased after him immediately canceled their contracts. The directors who once praised him turned their backs. The source of income was completely cut off. They threw him out to the fringes of society at a cruel speed, just like how people throw away an expired electronic device. The climax of humiliation occurred in December 2005. Renfro was arrested in an undercover drug raid in the Skid Row slums of Los Angeles. The media system, the very thing that had put him on the launchpad of fame, now played the role of the executioner. The Los Angeles Times and a series of news channels slapped on their front pages the photo of him wearing a prisoner's uniform, eyes glazed, face gaunt, hands tightly handcuffed. They publicly turned him into a laughingstock, a symbol of personal moral decay. This was a perfect crime whitewashing campaign. By nailing Brad Renfro to the label of a self-destructive addict, the Studio Alliance successfully distracted public opinion. Not a single person in the newsrooms asked the core question: who was the one that pushed a 10-year-old child into that toxic environment? Who was the one that exploited his labor to pocket hundreds of millions of dollars, then refused to provide any medical intervention when he began to shatter? Hollywood played the role of an innocent bystander excellently. They drained Brad Renfro's youthful energy to forge box office gold bars. When his physical body became decrepit, rotten, and incapable of printing money, they washed their hands clean, tightly locked the doors of their lavish Beverly Hills offices, and left him to drown in the very mud they had plunged him into. January 15, 2008, was not just the day Brad Renfro breathed his last breath. Through the lens of capitalists, it was the day the Hollywood machine officially closed a risk file. When the body of the 25-year-old actor was lowered into the grave at Red House Cemetery in rural Tennessee, not a single Warner Brothers executive showed up. There were no expensive wreaths from the directors who once praised him to the skies. The elite withdrew completely in an organized silence. They wiped away every trace of involvement, exactly how one deletes a corrupted file from a computer system. But the coldest cruelty did not lie in that absence. It lay in the quarterly financial reports. While Renfro's body decomposed underground, his 10-year-old image continued to generate profit at a dizzying pace. The Client, Sleepers, and Apt Pupil were continuously re-released, from VHS and DVD formats to cable broadcast rights and later global streaming platforms. This endless cash flow, in accounting terms, is called residuals, derivative royalties. Understood bluntly, this is a perpetual milking machine. The conglomerate continued to pocket millions of dollars every year from an image product created by a child who had shattered from exhaustion and chemicals. Not a single penny from that massive profit stream was set aside to establish a medical support fund for child actors. They swallowed it all whole. Look at how the media system shaped Renfro's legacy. They nailed him to a single medical concept: addiction. By medicalizing and personalizing his collapse, the Studio Alliance pulled off the most perfect responsibility whitewashing trick in history. They forced the public to believe that Renfro's death was a chain of wrong choices made by a weak-willed individual. A classic cautionary tale named Hollywood's Spoiled Child. But let's use logical thinking to counter that false indictment. No 10-year-old child sets themselves up for a 12-hour-a-day labor intensity under high-pressure lights. No 14-year-old teenager injects drugs into their veins, unless there are adults enabling, supplying, and normalizing chemicals in closed-door Beverly Hills parties. The corruption of Brad Renfro was not a personal biological accident. It was a byproduct. Accurately understood in industrial language, it was an inevitable auxiliary waste of the process of exploiting child labor at a tyrannical intensity. The U.S. legal system always prides itself on its strictness in protecting children's rights. If you put a 10-year-old child into a metallurgical factory, forcing them to work to the point of nervous breakdown and depression, you would immediately face a criminal sentence. You would have to go to jail. But if you put that same child on a magnificent film set, place them in front of a Panavision camera system, and slap on the label of art, not only are you not prosecuted, but you are also awarded prestigious prizes. The industrial machine successfully established a legal no-go zone, a place where the crime of child abuse and the deprivation of the right to natural development is smoothly legalized by multi-million-dollar entertainment contracts. Brad Renfro was never a fallen star. The concept of a star requires voluntariness. From beginning to end, he was merely an economic hostage, a biological entity ripped from its natural habitat, thrown straight into a vicious ecosystem. They forced him to feed a giant apparatus with his very core vitality, only to coldly dispose of him when that decrepit physical shell reached its limits of elimination. Next time, when your streaming platform coincidentally recommends the movie The Client. Next time, when you see the boy Mark sway with his sharp eyes, resiliently facing the judicial system and the mafia on screen. Cast aside the filter of nostalgia. Do not call it an acting masterpiece of a prodigy born for cinema. Look straight into that child's eyes. That dazzling frame is, in reality, the very first steps of a pre-scheduled death sentence. A death sentence coldly signed off by capitalists, inadvertently bought and admired by global audiences, and permanently buried beneath the fake gold dust of the world's most ruthless cinematic capital.